Okay.
Oh, good. Here we are. Now we're in the real world of Facebook. Well, I want to thank you, Anna, for coming and being with me all the way from Sweden and talking about community. That's, really great thing. Makes me really happy. And really quickly, this project, the 4 pillars, is really the basis of our work at the Global Theater Project that's evolved over the years. And so we've been exploring the question of kindness, the pillar of kindness, the pillar of community is where we are now. And then there's artistry, and then there's what we call the whole artist elements, which are really what makes art, and not just artists, not just theater artists, but is a values that really help all of us become more fully realized and actionable human beings. Everything from curiosity to courage to hunger for more and connectivity, passion. But for now, we're looking at community still. And I so much wanted to talk to you, and I've missed your gorgeous face so much because, full disclosure, you're a dear friend of mine. And we met in an interesting way, we met in an interesting way when you speak about community. And I also don't know why, but you're the first woman I've been talking to. And I've been talking to a lot of men, which I don't think means anything, but I just feel I want to talk with a fellow girl and see where we go from there. And I just wanted to share an article that I read recently, yesterday, just to throw into this mix. I read this article yesterday about this gentleman who had COVID. He was very, very serious. And he was on the brink of death. He actually was given last rites. And he was given FaceTime to say goodbye to his family. And he survived. And he credits the reason that he survived to the cleaning lady, who I hope I'm right, was from Guatemala. And she came in there every day and she gave him hope, and she was kind to him. She gave him caring. And it saved his life. And I feel right now that that is a metaphor for the world that we are living in. That right now we are in a world on a ventilator in terms of how our communities live together and come together. And I personally feel that caring is the missing element. Kindness is that missing element that can save us, can truly save us. And I wanted to talk to you about that, along with, other things. But I wanted to throw that out first as an entry, that idea that the creation of a caring society and how you respond to that in terms of your background and your experience, and also, throwing in all the mix of entering into international communities and cultures and what you might have learned living in all these different environments, always with a directed mission, it seemed to me, which I think is important, or could be important. And then how you brought that back to your own country in developing community, which you're doing now in your work in many ways. So I'm going to shut up now for a bit and listen to you and then ask questions as you talk.
Well, it's a very complex matter, I have to say. I mean, I like the story about the COVID patient who survives thanks to the cleaning lady. I think you're right. I think that our society is in a desperate situation, basically. And I think that the hunger for human relations, as in, interactions and being together in different ways and forms, is actually quite large in our societies. And I mean, if we go back to COVID, that's why the Swedish situation is what it is. We've got too many people who they have poor mental health. And if we shut down the whole society here, that will imply that suicides become a problem rather than death by COVID. And I think in those situations, you need to, I mean, if you're in a hospital cared by people who are wearing masks and things that mean you don't recognize them and that mean that they're not human to you, they might be aliens for all that you know, then of course the person that you will actually recognize in some way, probably not wearing the same kind of masks, then that becomes a person that you find a normality, like a situation of normality. And I don't know if she was wearing any.
Oh yes, she was wearing full on,
Yeah,
head to toe, every inch of
she was
her.
actually doing the kind of interaction that the medical staff wasn't then probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think community is really um, an interesting concept. I was actually thinking about this because in Sweden we don't have a good translation of the word community. So and it's because it's so complex. It can be so many things, right? It can be a little, I mean, your neighborhood. It can be an online group. I mean, online communities. It can be bigger than that. And I think that me personally working for the municipality of a town with about 160,000 inhabitants is struggling with the idea of this municipality being a community. It's not, it's 1,000 communities and more, obviously. Um, and yeah, I think the hunger for this human interaction, the way the the ease of actually speaking to each other, being civil to each other, because sometimes we've forgotten how to do that as well, it seems. I think in a city context is quite evident to everyone. I don't know how it is in the US, but here we don't speak to our neighbors anymore. We're not, I mean, we live in houses where we might just not know that our neighbor is well or dead or whatever. And that to me is not the way I want to live my life, basically. Yeah.
That's what my friend and colleague Mac calls the necessity for the revillagization of our towns and cities.
That's right. And a lot of it has to do with economics, I guess. I mean, now you just sort of you don't have to have the actual encounters with people that you needed before, because now you can just substitute that with paying for whatever it is that you want to be delivered, or found at a shop or wherever.
There's a couple things. One is when you talk about the 1,000 communities within the community of a city, which, when I started working in Italy, in Florence, when I got there and we founded the Florence International Theater Company, it was obvious to me that there are several cities layered in that city, right? So the obvious ones are the Florentines, and then you have the other Italians, and then you have the American students and the other students, and then you have the tourists, which are a community. They impact somehow that whole world, and then you have the stranieri, the foreigners who are not Italian, non-Florentines. There are other nations, and all within that. So you have all of this stuff going on, and then the Roma, as well, and no connection between, light sort of economic connections, maybe between these groups, but in terms of heart connections, not a lot of heart connections between those groups, and that's when it started first dawning on me, this need, this important need for those heart connections to somehow be made between communities, and that somehow finding like a common culture or a common cause, and not war or fighting a pandemic, but something that is much more creatively responsive, or intellectually lifting, spiritually expansive. And I'm even talking beyond the church, or the mosque or the synagogue, or the temple. And I see that Clara said that she can now see us, so that's good. I'm glad her computer's working. So hi, Clara. So um, so uh, like, to me, that question of how do those heart connections get made, and how do we have common purpose, um, could potentially be in that mix of, and that's where I personally, of course, think the arts engage in a partner in building community. But I think, also that when you're a stranger in a strange land, you develop other kinds of sensitivities, sort of as a survival technique, to bridge those communities and connect to them somehow. I mean, did you find that?
Yes, I did. I also think that there is a difference in approach between kind of the Nordics, and I would sort of throw in the US into the Nordics as well.
Some of us, yes.
Yeah, and the sort of older world of the Mediterranean, and I find that there are still codes of how to interact with people that remain around, well, Italy, Egypt, the Middle East, Greece, I'm sure as well, even though I don't speak Greek. There are codes and ways in which you know how to behave with people who are new and strangers, maybe as well. Of course, it's based on the local language then, so it kind of excludes the foreigners who are not making an effort. But it still makes life easier, I find, because it's more welcoming. It's easier to get into one community or another if you know how to use those social codes, basically. And actually, it can be language as well.
How do you think you learned those social codes? How did you learn those social codes? I mean, because you went from Italy, if I'm remembering correctly, to Egypt.
Yeah, yes, via Brussels or something.
Via Brussels. So those are three
Oh,
Florence, Brussels, those are very different cultures, no? Environments.
so I don't know. I mean, I'm a person of two cultures within myself. My mom's from Finland and my dad's from Sweden, and I think I've always just been really fascinated by people's way of interacting with each other. And I think I'm one of those people who come to a country and I just sit and observe for a long time. And by observing, I also because thankfully I have some kind of ear for languages. I kind of pick up
Yes, you do.
basic level of the language, which means that I can identify some of those clues of the interactions that make the social fabric, and it can be people who don't like each other. You can just tell that we need to still be civil with each other, and we need to still maintain this level of interaction because we're part of the same community, and maybe we have some kind of relationship in terms of non-economic dependencies.
What if, I mean, just to imagine, like, if you're not someone who is maybe even traveled abroad, but what is the guidance for someone who's entering not even a different country, but a different neighborhood or a different community within their city.
I,
That
yeah, I think listening, listening and observing. Actually, I think maybe we do too little of that today. We come with a set of preconceived ideas of how things are, and we see that today as well. And I think maybe that's my my role in life in some way. I sit and I watch and observe, and it helps me a lot. It helps me in my work. It helps me to have arguments with people because I'm not sure of anything, but I can see things from different perspectives.
So do you think that that's curiosity tied in there as well? A little bit
Sure.
of that,
Yeah,
or a lot?
yeah, absolutely. There's curiosity in there. But there's also, I mean, the curiosity is about understanding. It's like a search for understanding. Because we've got this complex society that we live in, which is basically mostly in cities these days with the current urbanization. And communities used to be in places, set in places with quite not that many people. And I mean, maybe based around the marketplace, based around something that was common to everyone. And I mean, a lot of the community development work that's being done in different places do actually try to bring in something similar to the marketplace. It can be a community garden. It can be something shared where you interact with people. And I think the key thing is difference, you know, people who are different to you. And I think today's society, and that's precisely why we don't know our neighbors and we've forgotten how to interact with them, is because we choose who we want to spend our time with, and we choose on the basis of likeness to ourselves, basically.
So I have two things.
Yeah.
One is something somebody's asking. So how do we ensure that social codes facilitate rather than inhibit communication between communities? How do we prevent it from becoming an old boys network?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, basically, I think it has to do with the setting. I mean,
that was my next question. Was
yeah,
space?
where
Was
do we
space?
interact?
Yes.
Because the old boys group and in Sweden that would be the sauna club. For some reason, which I know is tied up with all sorts of other things in other countries, but here it would be the sauna club. So that's a space which is in itself like confined, maybe also, you know, you can only be so many in a sauna. But yes, the space is very important, of course. Um, and I guess, I mean, part of what I do at work right now is trying to figure out how you shape cities in terms of how you build cities to become spaces of interaction.
Right.
And I don't think that there's an answer to that. I think it's more about the people, and maybe there being one or a few people who bring an idea together, like for instance starting a community garden or coming together around something else which is important in a specific place.
So, but I think what you're saying, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is conscious construction of spaces, that there needs to be intentional development of cities and spaces and towns so that these space gatherings are inviting collective action in one way or another. You know, interaction in a garden, interaction in something that sort of organically invites connection, or at least opens the door to it.
That's the theory, but then practice actually shows otherwise. You know,
what does practice show?
in the sense, like, there can be concrete jungle places where people have come together because they want to make the space prettier, and they might, come together with graffiti or whatever it is, and actually, or public theater or whatever it is. But it can also be street markets and other things that are community based. So I think, mm, I think cities are really, really complicated places, but I think what it takes is something to spark, something which can be someone who's very consciously wanting to make a difference.
Yeah.
It can be a youth club where young people start, seeing the place that they live differently. It can be the garden. It can be artists who want to bring beauty into a space. Or it could be a project by a municipality or something like that as well.
So this idea of staying like to like, even
Yeah.
within a town or a neighborhood.
Mm.
And then this sense of what we were talking about before, I think maybe we were before we went live, which is this, sort of how education educates younger people to be very self-focused, not necessarily selfish, but they're growing up on screens, and a lot of times they're doing what we're doing right now. I'm seeing you and I'm looking at myself, and I'm constantly in the mix of my view here. No matter how much I focus just on your face, off here is me. And so that's very much self-awareness, not in the Shambhala meditation way that I'm working on, but in being aware of how I look and how I'm, what's the perception of me. And it sort of flattens our ability to create relationships that are complex and messy, and risky, to take that risk to be vulnerable, which I think vulnerability is an important quality in community building.
Absolutely. And I think also there's maybe and I mean, obviously it's a generalization, but this whole situation, I think is also difficult, because there isn't instant gratification in community building, I don't think. And yet, on the other hand, there's also a question in me that I really want to explore. And today I got to know that I got a grant from the government to do this.
Congratulations, that's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yes. It's about the communities that already are in the communities that are invisible. Because we know that the places where, we might have socioeconomically more difficult problems with people who I mean, mostly in this country it's housing blocks and built in the sort of 50s that have been turned into rented apartments, and there's already a community in there, or 1,000 again. But how do we see that, and how do we engage with them? Because there's bound to be all sorts of different networks that, I mean, and also friendships between people. And what we know is that people who are new to this country certainly have a difficulty understanding how it works, which is not strange because we're terrible at explaining it.
Well, and plus they don't have the networks to build their lives from, to fulfill their dreams from.
Yeah. And it becomes more complex because usually, obviously, segregation means that these areas are usually inhabited by, well, people of other ethnic backgrounds than Swedish.
Mm.
Which means that you have to deal with a lot of the stuff that you're faced with on your own. And I always say that, you know, if a real crisis hits this this country, then those are the areas where you should be living, because these are people who are more resilient than Swedish people, because we only know money as an interaction. And we don't speak to our neighbors. Whereas I think in these areas, a lot of people do actually interact with their neighbors, and they have ties to their neighbors in another way.
Well, because I think that they build human capital,
Yeah.
you know, relational capital. And that is, you know, again, going back to that village concept, that's,
Yes.
you know, everybody has a role, they support one another, they know each other, they're there for one another, and that's how a strong community is built. And in environments where everything's transactional, there's lack of trust, there's lack of deep and intimate, sticky knowledge
Yeah.
of each other.
Yeah, that's right. I think trust and reciprocity are good.
Reciprocity is very good.
To think about when it comes, and I mean that goes back to something that I studied a long time ago. That's social capital theory, which is a horrible name.
It is, I know, but it's, you know, it's like you have to speak in two languages at once sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but trust and reciprocity are really interesting concepts that, yeah, that we should look into a lot more, I think, and it is about ties to people, and I think it's about ties to people who are slightly different to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, for those of us who have had the pleasure
Mm.
of living abroad, or for those of us that are in minority groups within the majority groups, you know, I mean, being a Jewish person, for example, in a mainly Christian country, especially when I was young, you have to learn how to navigate spaces differently. And it's a skill, you know, that most people don't have the opportunity to experience, because we tend to group with those that are like us, you know. Even within larger environments, we look for those that look like us or believe like us or whatever it is. But that skill does allow you to navigate the human map a little bit with a bit more facility, you know, than if you're so rigid and fearful of the unknown of what another human being that's not like you is. Then the possibility of creating community with that person is seems like a threat when there's really no threat there. You know, there's really more opportunity than threat, unless the person's a psychopath, and then threat to everybody.
Of that it's very slim though, usually. Yeah, and I think that's the thing, you know. Our societies and media, since, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, have been so focused on threats and fear. And I think because of that, there's so much lack of trust between, I mean, not only just people of the same kinds, but also people of different kinds, you know. And it's really like yeah, it feels almost like a strategy.
Well, I mean, I think maybe there does need to be some sort of intentional strategy. But when you, I mean, I'm going back to Egypt because I was always blown away when, you know, you went there and you had suddenly this unbelievable multicultural life, and then you were bringing this idea of bringing books and reading into the lives of children, right? How did that work in terms of this conversation? I mean, what were the successes and failures or obstacles and challenges that you met with that, in terms of building community around this concept of educated children?
Yeah, I think building community somehow, I mean, because we live in a democratic society, it's about also playing by the rules. And in some ways, that's part of religion too, you know, that there are a set of rules that people can relate to within religion, and there are a set of rules that people can relate to within democracy as well. But not everyone is aware of democracy. Not everyone's aware of different religions. And I think, I mean, taking
Oh my goodness, sorry, I thought that was off.
Taking children's literature to the Middle East was a democratic decision, basically. It was a decision trying to build children with different sets of words than they are used to, because we know that when children have larger vocabularies, it's more likely that they will start engaging in society because they have the skills for it. And again, there's language. You know, if you don't know how to interact with people, you're not going to. And so we brought books from all over the world, basically, that were based on fantasy things, on stuff that was unimaginable, rather than the things that have usually been part of Arab children's literature, which have been very much, you know, either religious or about a set of rules that you have to sort of obey when you're a child, like you have to eat your peas, that kind of stuff. And so here comes like Pippi Longstocking, the world's strongest girl, and a boy who refuses to fight, and that brings a good basis for children to start talking about things that are sort of strange to them. Like, if somebody hits you, of course I should hit you back. And then actually, like, maybe it's not such a good idea. So yeah, it was a very interesting project, and the most interesting thing was really working in the communities of the most deprived areas in Egypt, because Egypt is the country in which we were working with, I mean, about 40% of illiteracy. And we were in a community center in outside of Cairo, in one of those fairly deprived areas that was hard hit by an earthquake in the 80s. And basically, children's literature became a way for parents to learn how to read, because the children learned how to read, and so they could actually teach their parents. So, you know, it was a fantastic center, and it's still there, luckily.
Oh, good.
Yeah, run by a wonderful woman. So
and that's an intentional space, like what we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Earlier.
A safe space for children to express stuff and look at books that are not, you know, the Quran or such. And yeah. It's
no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, please ask.
No, I was just going to because you said that phrase, safe space, and I was thinking about this idea of how communities, you know, that this question I have, I shouldn't say this idea, this question I have, that the lack of healthy discourse and complex and honest and vulnerable discourse, and messy is the second time I use that word today, discourse really is an important aspect of being able to build community.
Yeah.
And, that I know that your work with, with your husband is around that, the idea of bringing people together and discussing issues.
Yeah. The basis of a school called home is to regrow a living culture. And this is all the words of Dougal because he's the wordsmith. I'm the community maker.
Well,
maker.
and a great cook, I'm sure. I might add.
That helps.
Who wouldn't want to be in a community where Anna cooks for you? So that's for sure.
The thing is, I think you're right there. In some ways, there aren't very many conversations like this out there either, because I think there is a tendency for everyone who wants to be public to be precise and create concepts and in some ways some of that work is unhelpful, I think, to building communities because, again, the language, when we use language that's difficult for people to understand, it excludes. And I know because of the fact that I've been living in different countries where I don't speak the language in the beginning, I know how that feels.
Yeah.
And I understand people who come to this country and don't speak the language here, how you feel like an infant the first 5 years.
Yeah. And you become very tired also, even when you do speak the language, because you have to constantly be attentive all the time. You're working hard.
But then, we have people who have spent their whole lives here and are born and bred in Sweden and that are still not really interested in I don't think they're uninterested in intellectual discourse or intellectual conversations. But the thing is that it might not be the way that they express themselves. And I think, to me, it's really interesting because I think I grew up like that in a community with a lot of people who are very different to me and my parents. But those are still my parents' best friends, and there's worlds apart, but they have the deepest trust and the deepest reciprocity within their little set of within their group, that they do everything together and anything for each other, which is really wonderful. And I think I like intellectual discussions, and I like to read interesting books, but I want to feel here in my heart that I am also a person who knows my neighbor and knows the people around me and do not make a distinction between who they are or what they like and so on. I want to be able to have a relation with them that's kind of sane and friendly.
You're making me consider that the idea of conversation doesn't necessarily require extended discussion. Like, people can participate in a conversation in a billion different ways. If a community is having a conversation or a conversation is brought into a space, there's so many different ways to respond to that conversation. And still, I mean, there is such a thing just simply as active listening.
Yes.
And then there's physical responses, and there's just a myriad of things that could be done so that we're not just talking about everyone participating at an intellectual level that is not superior but different to other intellectual levels also present.
Yeah.
And maybe it's bringing attention to that and really looking more toward is there a common interest that stimulates and inspires a collective response, and allow that collective response to build the community.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really the thing. Everyone has a skill set that they can bring to something, and that they can bring to a community. I mean, and I think what you were suggesting in the beginning as well, this in relation to the 4 pillars, actually, artists, I think, have a key role in this. What do I feel? And that, everyone has different words to describe what they feel when they watch a play or see a work of art, and some might be damning, and some might be very eloquent, and some might not be. But the point is that if you put together a theatre, a play somewhere in a small town, then you need people around you to provide all the stuff.
It's a community effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that's the beauty of community, and that's the hard thing about cities, in the sense that there's no good way of putting this, but I think in some way we don't see each other's uses. That's quite horrible.
How about value?
A value is good, but I think actually, like, in a transactional
uses.
Yeah, in a transactional situation that we find ourselves, and in the way that we think today, I think it's and that's it's horrible, but I think maybe that's it. Whereas when I think about this idea that we have of creating a school called home, and actually having it in a place, and wanting to be embedded in that place, I want to make as many connections with the people around me as I possibly can, because I see just how rich a place that school called home can be, because there are people who can participate, but there are people who can also offer other things around the school, and also just in terms of it being called a school called home, just provide a sense of home for us.
Yeah, and I think sometimes too there's the idea of presence. It's not exactly the same thing, but I meditate with at the Shambhala Center, and we made a decision that every Monday we are now meditating outdoors on the median of this major street on the grass there, with signs with George Floyd's name on it, and Black Lives Matter signs. So it's our holding a space for racial justice in our country. And the constancy, I think, of our presence on this median, and the cars coming by on both sides, but seeing us there. The cars are not participating with the actual event, but they slow down, they honk. Yeah. Sometimes they yell at us, affirmations through their windows, and they therefore become a part of an event that they're not physically a part of,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So it's something about consciously engaging in your city
Yeah.
that still will, reverberate in some ways, I think, into other communities that you probably won't know anything about,
Mm. Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, that things that are as horrible as what happened is some kind of spark of more communities.
Mm.
It becomes something that we can gather around. And again, maybe there isn't a space for it, but there's a cause and there's something that we believe in and that we really want to do something about. And then, of course, then that becomes a community that's not centered around place, because people have come from different places or different parts of the city, and they might not, I mean, under lockdown, they might not have been able to interact with each other than through a webcam. But, when you look at the pictures from Italy where people are going out on their balconies and playing music or singing or whatever, then that's another way of creating community, but within the place itself.
Yes.
And I mean, all of those things are I'm sure, important because again, we need social interaction. We cannot substitute that with this.
No. And I think what you just said too about Italy and really what you saw here, even though we never really had a heavy duty lockdown of any kind, this immediate need to connect,
Yeah.
And to express, to connect, express, spoke to me very deeply also about what is it in being a human being that we are ignoring as a culture, that is not helping the psyche, the psychological nature of our cities and towns.
Yeah.
That if we want to look at this question of community, community consists of individuals.
Yeah.
It's not it is a living thing, and that life has to be fed somehow and has to be attended to like a baby.
Yeah.
I have not had one, but you have one, and he's sleeping.
Yeah.
And gorgeous. And I can't believe I've never met him in person. Yeah. But do you know what I'm saying? That this is something that I think needs gentle and sincere attention. Is that human element to make the healthier whole, which certainly draws me right to my friend Mac's work, because that's his whole philosophy. Not philosophy, that's what they do over there in Shreveport and elsewhere. He backtracks that whole thing, that you can't have a healthy world if you don't have healthy countries. You can't have healthy countries without healthy cities without healthy neighborhoods without healthy relationships, and you cannot have healthy relationships if you do not have healthy people. Yeah. And that's it. You have to go to the individual person and then help them understand how to relate to another person so that there can be this mutual benefit, as opposed to being useful, having a use.
Absolutely. No, I don't like that word, but I think
it was appropriate.
Yeah, I think in that context it was. No, I agree. I mean, the problem is this. I mean, the way in which we're now individuals, but with individuality. The concept of individuality as some kind of island that is.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. So basically, maybe we shouldn't talk about individuals. We should talk about people or persons or whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, I see.
Yeah, just because I mean,
instead of that word, you mean, like, instead of saying individual, say each person, like.
Yeah, because to me, like the whole thing about Sweden is really that our system has been shaped around the idea that the person should, or each individual should not have to deal with basically any problem uh,
Oh,
or any predicament for that matter, which means that the state cares for you, or is supposed to care for you from cradle to grave, basically. And um, obviously, some of it costs money, like elder people's care and things like that. But it's still fairly provided by the government. And that has created the individualistic society that we have in Sweden, where if you look at all like values charts, there's this World Values Survey, we are like up far in one of the corners because we're so reliant on the state, where we are extremely secular. There's no faith in this country, really. And yeah, we have a lot of trust in the democratic system, basically. But I mean, that's a fairly good thing. But it means that we're extremists.
extreme individuals.
Yeah. And this whole transactional thing is actually like a real basis that our society is based on, which I think is also a route to why we don't feel the need to build communities in the same way. We have our families maybe, and we have our friends, and those are our communities, but they're like-minded. And I mean, your families might not be, but you don't choose your family.
No.
Yeah, no.
And I guess that works and has worked for a long time. And maybe the reason that, because I ran into the same issue of that word in Italy, right? Yeah. When I started the FITC, Florence International Theater Company, I'm running around going, we're serving the community, we're creating the community, we're interconnecting with the community, we're engaging the community. And after a while, my friend Katerina took me aside and said, you look naive when you use the word community, because here, that refers to like recovering drug addicts and the church. No, there's not like, but that time, by the time she told me, it was 3 years in and we were already doing the work. So it no longer mattered what word I used because the processes were in place, But it made me understand that is a big word in the States.
Yeah.
It is a very big word in the States. And maybe from this conversation, because I never put this much thought into it, maybe it's because we are a country of immigrants, even though certain people want to deny that fact, and Native Americans. And so we are a bunch of actual communities. We are not homogeneous in any way, shape, or form. And so that is a whole other dynamic that we do deal with. And our individuality, I think, recently, and we've always been very independent people, and we believed that we could do anything. But this idea of being self-centered and not having any collective action or collective culture is relatively, to some degree or another, to the majority, the top veneer of our culture is new. I mean, the other cultures that are, as you mentioned earlier, hidden cultures that are out in broad daylight and hidden because they're not given enough attention, that's not new for them necessarily. But but still, they hold their community strong and powerful. So it's a whole other dynamic here.
Yeah, and the state doesn't have the same kind of social.
No matter what Bernie Sanders keeps saying, I don't think we'll ever become Sweden.
No. Yeah, I
But
don't think we want to become Sweden, to be honest. Well, I mean, not
well, I don't
everyone.
think we can, because we're not generally homogeneous. We're not generally,
Yeah,
because we are so mixed and diverse. But I
yeah.
think the one thing I wanted to just get back to really quickly is that there is a difference maybe between a community of individuals and a community of whole and healthy people.
Mm,
And, defining what makes a person whole and healthy um, is, like, what is that person that then is mm, safe enough in their wholeness to be able to contribute to others.
mm,
And in that sense, not feel they're losing their individuality, but sharing their personness
mm,
in a
mm,
sense. I just wonder.
mm. I think that's a tricky one, actually. I think
Mm,
I think Dougal and I have this thing about we adopt people that we like, and usually it's people that we can see have gone through something that have made them stronger as people, or maybe reflected on themselves in ways that others might not
mm.
have had the opportunity to. Sometimes it's about a privilege, actually. But I think I think in ways like a real community, would help people who have not taken that step and who have not been helped to be helped
Yeah.
necessarily in an active way. I think just, because there's something to be said for role models. And in communities, you meet people, hopefully, with some kind of regularity. And you get to know people in different ways. And you can actually relate to people who might have done some work on themselves or have been through something similar to you, or just somebody who you really think that, okay, that person is great, I want to be a bit more like them. you know
So I'll ask this last question or open up, and then I'll let you go because I know it's late there. What you just said makes me think about, so communities exist. Um, do communities exist where, in your opinion, where you have people who are either like-minded or like-intended or like in some way, there's some connecting tissue, right? And then how do we work when we're talking about cities, since you are focused on that question, to take this community here and then this community here, and what is that consciously constructed bridge
Mhm.
so that they exist in the same atmosphere since they live in the same territory. Like, do you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, yeah,
So you're asking what the bridge is, basically.
or what the bridge could be.
What the bridge, and I think again the question will probably be like, either a cause or a place, which you have some kind of common interest in. Could be a garden, obviously, but it could be mm, uh, an empty building, or whatever. I think that that's it. Because also I think today there are a lot of intentional communities. Okay, we're all off to do this thing. We're gonna build a village of small houses out on the archipelago of Sweden, and we're all gonna go and have therapy together, because we know that this is a struggle and it's difficult, and yeah, we don't really know how to do it, but we're gonna learn as we go along, but we need therapy, clearly. And then everyone has the well, everyone has sort of like the same family constellations, more or less, or there are kids and they create this wonderful kindergarten where everyone goes, and I am so deeply suspicious of those intentional communities, or I fear them because I don't want to become somebody that I'm not, in a way. And I think in those intentional communities, I think it's less allowed to be who you are in actual fact.
Do you think also, I mean, to me, I've always kind of wondered, intentional communities sometimes to me sound like isolated communities.
Yeah.
Like we want to be with us intentionally,
Yeah,
away from the rest of you.
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, so in some ways, when we're looking for this place to buy in the countryside, um, there are places in Sweden where we have people that we know, and I wouldn't be opposed to moving somewhere close to where people that we know live. But that is not the same thing. It's there's still some kind of life that was there before this cohort of people from the city came to land down. And I mean, in this country and in the US, obviously, as well, there are lots of depopulated areas that need reviving, and I mean, I'm completely for that if you can do that in a non-toxic way, because again, like if we're talking about communities and we're talking about healthy individuals, I think that the basis of a healthy community is actually difference in a lot of ways. You learn from other people, and you get enriched as a human being by various experiences and various ways of just being in the world, I think. So I think maybe that helps individuals to become more whole in a way as well. And as we know from history, like communities a long time ago were support mechanisms for people. I mean, they had ways of dealing with people who have different, maybe mental illnesses, or maybe some kind of strange disease or something, which means they look different to others, or whatever. But it wouldn't be so strange to the people in that community to see these people from day to day, whereas today it becomes yeah.
We isolated ourselves
Yeah.
from all textures of ourselves, in a sense.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
and I think if you think about it, like when you have a conversation with somebody who you like and you are like, more or less, conversation flows fairly easily, usually because you have some kind of mutual interests. Sometimes when you're faced with people who are different from you, that might be more difficult. And actually, like, that's more developing to you as an individual, because you have to somehow be in an uncomfortable zone where you're not just you as you ordinarily are. And I think that's super useful for us.
Do you have something else to say on that?
Yeah.
I want to end on that, because I think that's a really fascinating and important point, to take forward and to think about, which is how that level of discomfort is actually like the soil in which healthier communities can flourish. Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. Well, I am going to end our live broadcast, and I'm going to see you in the little broadcast studio. Thank you. So thank you for joining me, Anna, and everybody.